Hemispatial neglect is a neuropsychiatric disorder which is a person's inability to respond to an object or environment from the opposite side of his brain damage. That is, if your right hemisphere is damaged, you can't respond from the left side of your environment. So, how would we know if someone had hemispatial neglect? Before we go ahead, we need to know two key definitions. Contralesional means on the opposite side. This means that if you have damage on the right hemisphere, your left side of your body will get affected. On the other hand, ipsilesional means the same side. So if you have damage on your right hemisphere, your right side of your body will get damaged. People affected by this disorder may fail to respond to incoming stimuli from the contralesional side with a reduced level of visual attention. This can be seen in behaviors like eating food from only one side of the plate or shaving and applying makeup to only one side of your face. Neurological tests can also be used to assess the severity of this damage. Asking patients to draw a clock is a common neuropsychological test where affected patients would draw a clock but leave out numbers on the left side of the clock. The bar dissection task is another one. This requires the person to draw a bisecting line in the middle of a horizontal line. Affected individuals would draw a line closer to the right side as the entire line is not in their available visual field. After understanding what symptoms hemispatial neglect patients experience, let's look at the root problem. The brain. Broadly speaking, this is a right cerebral hemisphere syndrome. What this means is, if there is damage to the right hemisphere, we may see weaknesses in the left side of the body. This is because the right hemisphere, specifically the posterior parietal association cortex, is responsible for integrating information from the body, which then provides spatial information and helps direct attention to the object or body part. It sends output to most of the skeletal muscles on the left side of the body. A dysfunction of this area will affect the input and the output to upper and lower motor neurons in the left side. We can also see somatosensory abnormalities of the left side of the body. This occurs because somatosensory information ends up on the right side of the brain as pathways in the central nervous system take the information up the spinal cord and into the cerebral hemisphere, which then moves on to the right side to be perceived. When there are dysfunctions in the axons or even general parts of this area, we can see somatosensory abnormalities. Similarly, we can see the same issue with vision. Visual information from the left field comes over to our right cerebral hemisphere and ends up in an area of the cerebral cortex, where visual information gets processed further. Again, damage to this area or its axons translates into vision abnormalities. We don't usually see any issues with other sensory functions as the information goes to both hemispheres. Therefore, if the right side has damage, the left hemisphere can carry out the function. There are also other areas in the brain responsible for attention, and this is where effects of hemispatial neglect are most apparent. The right hemisphere is responsible for the left side, and this works contralaterally, which means the left hemisphere pays attention to the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere pays attention to the left side of the body. People may not notice auditory or even somatosensory information coming from the left side. With newer technology like voxel-based lesion mapping analysis, research has found specific areas responsible for these visuomotor functions. The right inferior parietal lobule handles perceptive visuomotor components, while the right dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is in charge of the exploratory visuomotor component, and deep temporal lobe regions for the allocentric or object-centered component. Spatial representation is the way space is represented in the brain, which may be impaired in hemispatial neglect. When a patient was asked to name cities on the map of France, he named towns in the east. When the map was rotated 180 degrees, his focus still remained on the east side. However, when the same task was mentally imagined, the patient was successful in responding with western towns. To conclude, hemispatial neglect is a disorder caused by brain damage or stroke, typically affecting the right hemisphere of the brain, which then causes a lack of response on the left side of the body. Due to this damage, it can cause negative effects on visual and somatosensory abilities. The posterior parietal cortex is the main leader in charge, largely controlling the integration of information from these motor and visual systems.